May I request representatives to remain seated while we greet the President. The Assembly will hear an address by Her Excellency Cristina Fernandez, President of the Republic of Argentina. I request protocol to escort Her Excellency.
En nombre de la Asamblea General.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations Her Excellency Cristina Fernandez, President of the Republic of Argentina, and to invite her to address the Assembly.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. President of the General Assembly, members of this Honourable Assembly. Allow me at the outset to welcome a fact that, or an event that was very relevant and took place in this very room a few days ago, and to be more precise, in September this year, when the General Assembly, by 136 votes in favour, decided to approve the basic guidelines for the restructuring of external debt of countries. This was a very significant triumph. It established new principles. These are the ones that should guide the way we deal with and resolve when we talk about renegotiating on the part of a given country its external debt. The sovereignty of a country to decide its own macroeconomic policy and to decide how it will restructure its debt. Good faith, transparency, impartiality, equitable treatment, so that we don't distinguish between two different players, and so everybody be treated on a level playing ground. The sovereignty in terms of jurisdiction and implementation, the legitimacy, the very sustainability, some of the, perhaps the most important of the principles, because this refers to paying the debt and respect one's debt, but not at the cost of the hunger and misery of our own peoples, but through a political and economic project on the basis of a sustainable macroeconomy, which makes it possible to develop our societies. And finally, and perhaps the most important principle which was lacking in terms of regulation for sovereign debt, and that is a logical principle which applies in all internal legal regulations throughout the world. When a company goes bankrupt, when a company cannot pay its own debt in any country, and including in this one, in the United States of America, and also where there is the bankruptcy of municipalities, how is consensus reached? How do we reach a qualified majority when 76% of the creditors here in the United States, and also in my own country, the Republic of Argentina, when they come to an agreement with the debtor, they establish timetables for the payment, and this becomes part of the law, and it's mandatory for the other creditors, when 76% agree, let me repeat that once again. This principle is also enshrined when the majority do decide one form of payment, then it applies to everybody else. Now, this agreement, this principle, these conventions have been approved here, and we have decided to submit to our Parliament to make it an instrument of public order which controls internal domestic practices. And it was based on the default that Argentina experienced in 2000. This was the major sovereign debt issue. The world at that time was growing at rates above good rates, but Argentina, because of its debt, went bankrupt, and this debt came from previous times. In fact, to be precise, it began in 76 when the constitutional order was overthrown and there was a coup d'etat, and this carried on during the 90s with the convertibility regime. Then an Argentine peso was worth $1. And this led to the 2001 default and the bankruptcy of the institutionality. In 1 week, there were 5 different governments, but Argentina was able to rebuild itself, rebuild its economy, its society, when the politics took control of the economy. And this was as of the 25th of May 2003, when the politicians retook control of the economy, and they decided to convene or to bring together all the creditors in 2005, and then there was a further in 2010 under my presidency, and the first one was during the presidency of Dr. Nestor Kirchner, who in this very General Assembly here in his first speech said that the dead cannot pay debts, and that it was necessary for the creditors to allow Argentina to grow, to be able to pay. Now, this was not a premonition of any kind. It was not that he saw the future. He simply applied economic logic, that it is impossible to pay a debt if there is not economic growth in the country, the debtor country. And that's how it began. Argentina began its inexorable progress, which it was also related to what happened in 2005 when it was decided to pay off the total of the debt to the IMF, which was imposing the macroeconomic policies on our countries. And as of then, Argentina began to grow. And it was an additional element on the train of the developing countries moving towards sustainable development of the international economy. We'll never forget. We do not forget that the greatest growth took place amongst the emerging countries, particularly led by the Asian Pacific countries. And it was up to me then, during my first intervention as president of the Republic of Argentina in the same area, this was in 2008, in the September of 2008, to see how this locomotive, which was dragging the world forward to sustain growth, was added. Another engine was added to it. There are trains with 2 locomotives, 2 engines. We had China, the emerging countries, with high rates of growth. In 2007, in the case of China, these economic growth was 14% GDP growth. And 2008, we had the fall of Lehman Brothers and Wall Street, which led to an economic crisis, which still we are experiencing. but with some differences, because the crisis began here, in the very heart of international finance. And it began with the subprime crisis in 2007. And finally, it all blew up in 2008. 2009 was the year of the global collapse of the economy, but except Asian countries, and include Latin America. Our growth rate was negative in 2009. In 2010, the crisis extended to the Eurozone. And then there was the dealing with the debtor countries. We know that this is a euphemism when we talk about saving the debtor countries. What we're talking about is saving the banks. Billions of dollars were transferred to banking entities based on a discussion in the G20 in London, when we said it was necessary, yes, do save the banks so that we don't have a repetition of the 1930 depression, but it was absolutely essential to have regulation to allow this flood of resources which was being injected into the financial sector should come back to the real economy, to enter into the circuit of producing services and goods, so there'd be a new round of growth. But nothing like this was done. Indeed, on the contrary, on the saving of countries, in fact, was a policy of just fine-tuning and adjustment, which was, in the Eurozone, in fact, led to a recession in that zone and a drop in employment to historic levels which had never been seen. Italy, 25% of the young people, or 50% of the young people, were unemployed. In Spain also, two-digit unemployment. And then 2014 and 2015 with a strong drop in global demand. And so we see how this locomotive of the crisis and the Lehman Brothers, which collapsed here in the heart of Wall Street, it then infected Europe, and now it's trying to be extended to the emerging economies as well. We were the ones who were sustained over so many years. We were sustaining through our own growth. Argentina was part of this growth. This year, despite all the difficulties, despite the Vulture funds, which do not, the restructuring of the debt on the basis of 2.7%, and doing this with the complicity of some juridical institutions in this body. They are claiming that they're demanding that we should pay on 7%, $20 billion, when the restructuring for 92% for 40 billion. What is this capitalist logic? What sort of mathematical logic can this have? And how long will the restructuring of the 93%, if we meet the demands of these predatory finances, paying them 7%, the half of this 22%. So no, any logical judge would say, no, this is not right. They can't pay at 7% the half of what they paid at 90%, even particularly when some of this 7% were bought by these bonds. We bought these bonds when Argentina had defaulted on its external debt. For that reason, the approval of these basic principles for the restructuring of a country's external debt, its sovereign debt, which also have relationship with anti-vulture fund laws, perhaps, for example, in Belgium, does not mean assistance to Argentina. which is depositing 7% of its debt to its creditors. This is in fact assistance to the rest of the world. It's an attempt, it's the very first serious attempt to introduce reason and regulation in a sector, which is the financial sector and the derivatives, which from the transformation of commercial banks, making them inversion banks, since then, there has been no intervention, no control in their activities. That's the reason why we say that in September, what was agreed was a very significant and major step forward, and it should be followed up upon, because the world, ladies and gentlemen, nothing's good in the world. We can talk about the refugee crisis, which is the result of the financial predators in the countries which are not able to help their countries, and therefore they go in dinghies from Africa to Europe, refugees from war. I wish also to talk about a process of economic concentration which is unheard of in the world. According to the most recent IMF report, 1% of the global population holds 50% of the wealth. Here, in this very country where we are, which was able to promote the American dream, the middle class of America, which attracted so many Americans, has attracted so many people to come here. 1% have more than 30% of all the wealth. How long? How long can such a society keep on going? How can a world continue which has such inequality in terms of inclusion and income, in terms of all that this brings with it? We saw this yesterday in President Xi Jinping's meeting. How can we talk about gender empowerment when the resources are so inequitably distributed, and when we expel people from their countries, and when they cannot be received in other countries, when they are refused entry into other countries? So in the face of this situation, this is a situation which we need to face up to. We need to address the problem of the financial markets and the need to inject resources into the real economy so that we get jobs once again, so that we have production again as the main engines, the great engines of the well-being of societies. Now, I'd also like to congratulate the USA and the Islamic Republic of Iran, and also the other members of the Security Council, the permanent members of the Security Council, plus Germany, for having reached an agreement on nuclear issues, which will help to resolve the situation and bring more security to a country to a world which is in war and conflict. Now, from these negotiations, we do hope, although it has not yet entered into force, we would like to say that in 2010, we had a visit in Argentina for Mr. Gary Seymour, and then he was the main White House advisor on nuclear issues. He came to visit Argentina on a mission with one goal, and that was that Argentina, which had in 1987, under the first democratic government and under the control of the IEA, had provided for nuclear fuel, and to him we explained, our foreign minister explained, Mr. Hector Timmermans explained, that negotiations were underway specifically to reach an agreement, and that the Islamic Republic of Iran had less uranium, but it needed to continue with this nuclear power station, and so they came to us, the Argentinians, to ask if we could provide nuclear fuel to the Islamic Republic of Iran. Mr. Rouhani was not yet there. It was the previous president. The negotiations began then, and I remember that the foreign minister came to see me, and he submitted to me the proposal that had been submitted, and the advisor from the White House said it would be very difficult given the relationship between Argentina and Iran, given the terrorist attack which had taken place in the Republic of Argentina in 1994, and the decision of the judge to accuse a number of Iranian citizens. So in that context, it was impossible for Argentina to make a contribution to this negotiation process, which I repeat, was already underway in 2010. So I looked at the agreement in my office, and I said, now if the request was made in writing and it was signed, we, despite all that we've gone through, because we believed it was important to achieve the objective of the nuclear non-proliferation, you know that Argentina is amongst the small club of countries that produces nuclear fuel, but at the same time we are leaders in terms of nuclear non-proliferation. Therefore, for us, nuclear non-proliferation is also a question of state. So that's what I said to my foreign minister, and he conveyed that to the envoy from the White House, Mr. Amor, and we said that this nuclear fuel was property of Argentina, and we had the necessary technology to make it, but provided that this was requested in writing and signed, and that was conveyed. I believe that was the last time that our Foreign Minister saw Mr. Seymour. Thus, in 2013, Argentina signed a Memorandum of Understanding specifically with the Islamic Republic of Iran to deal with the legal aspect of this issue. Now, we're talking about in 1994 the attack, but then in 2000, now we're in 2013, there'd been water on the bridge, there'd been new governments, but we were trying, because we are strongly convinced that it's important to counter terrorism and also in the memory and for the justice to clarify and to find those who were guilty and to punish the guilty for that terrorist attack. That was the objective of the Memorandum of Understanding, but it seems that the time was reached when the signing of the 5+1 and Iran came. Mr. Rouhani was in place, but the negotiations had already begun, and we didn't understand the reason why. If the critics were being made, if they were negotiating simply a juridical cooperation agreement with Iran, so that the judge of Argentina could deal with the 5 Iranian citizens in Tehran, because they were preventing the extradition of them. Now, what was the reason? I learnt it here from the mouth of another president regarding hypocrisy in diplomatic relations. There's much hypocrisy. There's much geopolitical things being involved here, and very little interest, in fact, for paying justice to the memories of these victims and their families. And then at a later stage, when we sent this draft, this treaty, which was agreed by our Congress, and I expressed this to I'm talking about the Congress of the US, I hope that they will approve this agreement, or at least will not delay it, because this will make an important contribution to global peace. We are coherent in our approach. It's not that what applies to us doesn't apply to others, or that we should use elements or instruments which have little to do with objectives, but we just make declarations to improve the image of a country. But it's actually the reality of the situation. And finally, the judge in this case decided that it was possible to clarify the situation from the accused. And today, this case is blocked. We can call upon only the goodwill of the Islamic of Iran, because we don't have any other leverage, any other instrument to have an outcome on this. But things have happened in my country, the Republic of Argentina. Now we are dealing with the case of recovering, and this is at the level of the highest levels in the intelligence service and the legal bodies involved in the AMIA case since 1974. Now, the public and oral sentence, and following the displacement, which was ordered by Argentinian intelligence services on the grounds of strong suspicions for the investigations, and to deal with this case so that we could deal with the Iranians at the end of last year, led to the movement of some high senior officials, some of them who were in office since 1972. They lived through all these dictatorships, all the governments, including my own. And today, they are here. They've moved to the US. A few days ago, when these transfers were made, the investigative prosecutor Nisman died, was killed. Now, all this, I have also always maintained that AMIA was a complicated chessboard of international politics. And beyond being a chessboard, it's a tyranny of external interest, external to my country, a tyranny in which the most weak and vulnerable, the smallest, are trapped in this game, and the rest are on the outside, on the sidelines. Now, this oral hearing, which is taking place after 14 years of delay since it began, the investigations which is taking place into the death of Nisman, we're coming up with very interesting information of linkages with secret services from other countries who have accounts abroad, with links with the Vulture funds. And I'm talking about members of the Jewish community in my country. I'm not talking about lies or hypocrisies. I'm talking about what is actually happening. And we have, on a number of occasions, a couple of days ago, mentioned to the US ambassador in our country, as to in what quality this former member of the intelligence services of Argentina is in the US. He was charged with the entire investigation into the AMIA affair since the very first day, when I was hardly just a provincial member of parliament from the south of the country, from Patagonia. That's where I was when the bomb was placed, and he was responsible for this investigation. And now the investigation into Mr. Niemann, and he's totally linked with this and with other individuals. Our ambassador in the United States then, on the instructions of the Foreign Office, has submitted a note to the Department of State and has had a meeting with the Department of State to request, if this person should be here in the United States, he's almost protected. I don't know protected from what or from whom, but he is here and protected. And a few days ago, the person responsible for the AMIA course has asked Interpol to submit an order. This is a warrant on the whereabouts of this individual. Since we've been doing, since the 2007 with this President Kirchner, and since then myself, over all these years we've been asking for an extension from from Iran, and today we're asking them again for the cooperation of the United States. Judges in our country, we want to know, where are these people, where are these officials? And also reference has been made. You could ask yourselves, why am I giving so much time over to this issue? It's the least amount of time I can give in terms of what the time that these vulture funds have allocated to criticizing us and saying that we are complicit with the Iranian regime. If we are complicit with the Iranian regime, then what is President Obama in that case? Also, we can't have double standards in diplomacy. We cannot. We cannot continue to use weapons, instruments of international intrigue drawn from Jean le Carré novel, because we know the world of communications, this world of globalization on the internet that we just dreamt about, which is now dominating the entire world, today is a very powerful communications tool for all of us, for everybody, so that everybody knows what is happening at a particular point in the world. So in Argentina, my government, our government, will tirelessly seek the truth and justice in the AMIA case, and we call for the cooperation, therefore, of the countries whose citizens are accused, and this country here, the USA, so that they should also contribute to clarifying why these citizens are present, because they will be required, as they have been already required, to be in our country, the Republic of Argentina. But faced with this world of economic crisis, I listened closely to some of today's speeches, and the truth is that these changes taking place at an amazing speed. I remember the most recent meeting I took part in, of the G20. The last one I couldn't attend because of health reasons, the one in St. Petersburg, where practically the government of Syria were faced by the freedom fighters, and they wanted they were supported by the entire Western world. But today, the freedom fighters are part of ISIS. And the truth is, I would like to ask you, actually, I have a question as to how this group actually functions, the apparently Islamic group. Who finances them? When you see these horrendous scenes, when you see clearly that there are 3 or 4 cameras who are filming, it's like a movie, that this is not simply a homemade film like a fundamentalist group could make with a tiny camera or no, there is almost a Hollywood set there. it's like a Ford Coppola movie, and we never see these cameras. It would be good for us to ask ourselves, where does all the money come to fund all this? This would help to ensure that we can find the keys to combat one of the worst scourges that is facing humanity today, and this is the fundamentalism of whatever nature, whatever dogmatic, religious, and basically those which consider the neighbor as their enemy, as a target to be eliminated. Now, I'd like to leave this assembly today with these problems of debt and the economic problems and terrorist attacks and international complicities. I also wish to pay a homage today to the continent that I belong to, Latin America. A few hours ago, I was here. Before I spoke, a president, a compañero that I admire and love very much, the president of Cuba, Raúl Castro, now, for the first time in 17 years, the president of Cuba is back here in this GA. Now, the truth is that for us, Latin Americans, those members of Mercosur, UNASUR, and CELAC, who have struggled so much, who have so much discussed to ensure that Cuba can return to be part of these multilateral entities. We see this as a triumph of the perseverance on the part of the region and fundamentally achievement of Cuba. And we also recognize the government of the USA, who has just opened its mind and has understood that things could not continue as they were in the past. And I'd like to thank another Latin American who was also in this very same hall, perhaps has greater authority than the rest of us, because he sits on the seat of St. Peter in Rome and who played a determining role in the establishing the agreement between the US and Cuba. And he came here and he said to the world, and he spoke from this platform to the world, and he said that money cannot continue to determine politics, and that it's fundamental. There's a basic principle that is respected by all religions here. Do not do to others what you would not like others to do to you. As a Latin American, also, the joy of seeing a few days ago in Havana the photograph of the president of Colombia, the president of Cuba, and the representative of FARC, launching the end of a conflict that has been going on for more than 50 years. And they tried to put an end to the guns, that no, the social, political, and cultural conflicts cannot be resolved by guns and bombs. They're resolved by talking together and by accepting the other person. I also welcome very much the fact that I am part of this Latin American region, where we do not have religious conflicts nor cultural conflicts, but where we are all sons or grandchildren of immigrants. And we're receiving internal migration as well. In my country, the national universities, the public universities, host students from around the continent. We don't give a red card to anybody because we believe it's necessary to contribute to and to establish a fairer world. And for that reason, I say that Latin America, having been seen as the emblem of inequalities, with the growth which we've seen through our governments, our national governments abroad, our popular national government and democratic governments, which some people call populist governments, but these include millions of our fellow citizens. They allow our citizens to enjoy the benefits of education, health, housing. We say that we are a growing continent, a continent that is integrating together. And perhaps this contribution that we have made from Argentina since 2001, we've been reconstructing our country, and we will be growing by 2.7% of our GDP. All this allows us to say that inclusion, that growth, that development, that production, that trade will be based on incorporating all those people, involving all those people who've been employed, improving the wages of those who earn miserable wages, respecting the rights of young children and young people, and to create, on the basis of synthesis, a fairer society, a more equitable society, and a more egalitarian society. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Argentina for the statement just made. May I request representatives to remain seated while we greet the President of the Republic of Argentina.